president of Floyd County Historical Society. I want to thank you all for coming today. Sort of looking forward to this. Awfully good crowd. First thing I want to do is I want to introduce two of our 4 interns that are back here, Morgan Nolan and Alexis Vance. Morgan is from New River, working through New River, and Alexis is at Roanoke College. And we've got 2 other interns you'll probably see running around the museum. So we're trying to expand that and take advantage of the things they have to do to get their college education. I want to introduce our speaker today. I've known him since he went to work for the Virginia Department of Historical Resources. Mike Pulis. He is the senior architectural historian for the department. He's explained to me that senior got added because somebody insisted on putting another part of his title. But I've known Mike a long time. We've worked a lot with Gerald and things over the years, working on projects up here in Floyd, and I'm looking forward to it. Mike, it's all yours. Oh,
Thank you all very much. Thanks for having me. It's a wonderful, it's a pleasure to be in Floyd today. So I'm just going to get right into it. It's kind of a deep dive into log house construction, but I tried not to get down too much in the weeds. But what I want to do first is kind of explain the types of different mostly houses, and then explain some things about how they were built and the details. And then I'll get into quite a few Floyd County examples that I've looked at over the years and photographed. But first, I want to talk about these 4 different types of houses. And I'll give you examples of all of them. And not all of them are in Floyd. For my job, I cover 32 counties. And so I've been lucky enough to look at log houses and log buildings in probably every one of those counties. Maybe not every one, but most. There's a lot of good ones in Pittsylvania County still. And the reason I wanted to show this one is because it is a single pen house, but let me get my pointer out. Although pointers usually don't work on TV screens. Nope. Anyway, it is a single pen house, but a lot of people would identify this as a double pen house because there's these notches going down the middle, and I have a close-up of that so you can see it a little better. And so what those are is a partition that goes through the center of the house. It's what divides the house into 2 rooms. But if you look carefully, all these logs continue straight across. There's no corner there. It's just that the partition is notched into the front and back walls of the house. And so when I've seen scholars call this a double pen house, I think, well, maybe that's not correct. Maybe it should be called, in my mind, it's certainly a single pen house. And then this is a good example of a double pen house. And I have to credit this photo to Dan Pizzoni, who is with us today, because he wrote National Register nomination for this property. I don't know if you remember, that was a long time ago. But so this one has 4 corners, it has 8 corners. But the common way, a very common way of attaching one log pen to another log pen is to set up a corner post and then peg one of the log cabins into that post, and then the other one has its own notched corner. So to me, this is a true double pen house. It has 4 corners. It has not just a partition going through it. There's not a lot of examples of these double pen log houses. The way that most people enlarge log houses was to build another pen some distance away from the original and then attach them, because it's probably easier than doing the corner post and notching it all together. So This is not only a crooked picture, but a very crooked house. Sorry. And this was actually a slave quarters in Bedford County, but it's what they call a dog trot plan. So you have two separate pens, each with four corners. They're built some distance apart, and then there's an open breezeway in the middle that's called a dog trot. And that was an easy way to connect two pens together and make a larger house. And a lot of slave quarters were built like this, but also they were built for white people too. It was just a type of log house. It wasn't exclusive to any population or anything like that. And this is just a really good, beautiful example. It's still in pretty bad condition, but it has been stabilized and leveled since this picture was taken. And so on the left is a picture of that open breezeway in the middle, the dog trot. And that's a good place to put a staircase to save space inside the log pen. Otherwise, you're taking up an awful lot of space with a stair. And then on the right, this is the same building you just saw, an example of square notching, which is, I find in the Blue Ridge and to the west is very rare. But over in the Southside counties and the Piedmont counties, like Bedford, where this is located, down into like Halifax and places like that, the square notch is a little more prevalent. And I have an illustration that shows different notches coming up in just a sec. And then the last of the four building types is a saddlebag log house, where you have a central chimney. It has fireplaces in both sides, so it serves pens on both sides. So the picture on top was before the pen on the left got dismantled. And the reason I like this picture so much is because it shows the chimney with the fireplace so that you can imagine how that worked. And then you see where the ladder is, how that has some parging or paint there. That's because there was a walk-through there where you could walk from one pen into the other. And sometimes those flanking areas are just made into little closets or storage areas. I think that's a really good illustration of a saddlebag plan. So those are the four types. Everything I'm going to show you fits into one of those four categories. Everything that I've seen in Floyd County fits into one of those categories. So just to show you some of the tools of how log buildings are made, the old timers always told me that hewing had to be done with a broad axe, but I've talked to some log cabin people since then, and they tell me that a log house can be made without a broad axe, and it stands to reason. Not everybody had a broad axe, and the broad axe, what it was good for was removing large amounts of stock from the round log, because you're taking a big round log and you're making it into a rectangular. And so they cut notches in the side of the log, and then they removed all that excess wood, oftentimes with a broad axe. And sometimes you can see broad axe marks on the sides of logs, not always. So what they hewed with, and this is pretty much in every log building that's a hewn log building. Some log buildings are round logs. Those tend to be later, and I'm not really going to talk about round log buildings today. I'm sticking pretty much with the traditional hewn log buildings. And the way that they hewed the logs was with a foot adze. And there's different kinds of foot adzes. Some of them are wider, some of them are more narrow. But that one in the middle with the handle looks about the same width as the adze marks that I usually see. So what they did was they walked along the log and they walked backwards, and as they went, they used the foot adze and they stopped the adze with their foot. That's why it's called a foot adze. And it took some skill, and apparently you could really hurt yourself until you gained that skill. But those individuals that were really good at hewing with an adze could do it so cleanly that you could barely even see a mark left by it. Sometimes I see log buildings that the logs are just so clean you can't even tell they're hewn. But they're not sawn, they are hewn. So in this slide, I mostly wanted to point out the way the rafters tended to be done in the 19th century, let's say before the 1880s or 90s. Usually the rafters are sawn, and then they're pegged at the top. And if there's a cross tie, those will be pegged in to keep those rafters from spreading. So things are generally done without using nails or screws. Things are generally done with mortise tendon or a lap joint with a peg through it. And almost exclusively everything I'm talking about today and showing you is from the 19th century, from 1800 to 1900. In this region, I've never found a log building that I could say for sure predates 1800. There are some reputed to be earlier, but they've not been verified, and that can be really difficult to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can date a log building, but it's seldom an exact science. Basically, what I do is try to come up with a range of dates. Like I might say this house was built between 1830 and 1850 and feel pretty confident about that, but I can't prove it. And then on the boards that are laid across the rafters, I call those sheathing boards. You can see the saw marks, and that's from a vertical saw. And a vertical saw can help you date to a point, because circular saws came into the area in the 1850s, especially more populated areas like maybe down in around Christiansburg or something. Up here, everything's maybe a little bit later. But so in 1850s, circular saws came in. So when you see that circular saw mark, that can kind of help you. You can't date a building based on any one or two clues. You have to look at all of them and try to take them all into consideration. And then those sheathing boards, all those nails used to hold wooden shingles. Every old building, pretty much every old building around here before the 1870s at the earliest, had either wood shakes or shingles. I have not really seen any evidence of metal roofing or anything like that before the 1870s at the earliest. So, let's go on. So this is an example of wooden shingles being used as chinking between the logs. And that makes sense in a lot of ways, because wooden shingles around here tended to be made of chestnut very often. Chestnut's a very durable, it's a decay-resistant wood. As we know, there was a whole lot of chestnut around here before the blight in the early 20th century killed them all. But when you're making a shingle, you're splitting wood, and that's an ideal time to make wood to fit between the logs. So most of the time, the chinking between the logs is made out of chips of wood. I call them chips or wedges of wood, not shingles. Shingles are rare. This was a rarity, and that's why I took a picture of it. But so they wedged wood in between the logs, and then they covered it with a mud, which was called daubing. Nowadays, we just call it all chinking. Everything between the logs is chinking. But in those days, it was chinking and daubing. Oftentimes, the daubing had a little bit of lime in it, or sometimes even some livestock hair to kind of help it hold together. But shingles were made with two tools, seen here, the froe and the mallet to split the wood, and then a draw knife to shave the shingles down. And if you were making shakes, you probably didn't need the draw knife, but you still have to split the wood. But so you're cutting up chestnut to make shingles. It's a perfect time to cut wedges of wood to fit between the logs. So this, I think, is a really instructive photograph because I want to familiarize you all with the different types of notches, corner notches used in log construction. And at the top, you see the common V-notch, which is by far the most common type of corner notching in our region. I would say 80% at least of all the log buildings I've looked at throughout my career have been V-notched. And I'll show you some other types. We saw the square notch earlier. Okay, and then the bottom logs of a log house or even of a frame house is called a sill, the one on which everything else is built. In other words, the first piece of wood sitting on top of the foundation is called a sill. And a lot of times I've noticed that sills use different types of notching, in this case, a half dovetail notch. If my pointer worked, I would kind of outline that for you, but I think you can see that it's a half dovetail there and a V-notch up above. The adze marks, I looked through all my slides and after I made this talk, and I noticed there's really no slides that really show an adze mark very clearly. And this is one of the few that does, but that log is weathered to the point that they're a little bit difficult to make out, but it's those little vertical slits in that bottom log. Those are made by the foot adze. And then I wanted to point out the stone chinking. A lot of times, instead of pieces of wood, it was just easier to just gather some stones and put those between the logs. So stone chinking is not uncommon. I've probably seen it in 20, 30, maybe 20% of the log buildings I look at. And the great thing about stone is it doesn't rot, it doesn't invite pests, it doesn't decay. And it's probably easier to gather than to split a whole bunch of wood in a lot of cases. So we'll probably see some other examples with stone chinking. And so this is probably the best illustration I could find that showed more than one type of notching. But the V-notch is on the bottom. As I said, that's the most common. The square notch that we saw in Bedford County in the middle. The half dovetail, we just saw that. Full dovetails tend to be kind of rare for log houses, but I have a couple examples for you. And then the saddle notch tends to be used only with the round logs that weren't hewn. And you see saddle notch used in a lot of the tobacco curing barns that you see all around South Side. And I know there's some in this county, but tons and tons of them in Pennsylvania and Halifax. Even Franklin County has a lot. And those tended to be a little bit later in time. It seems to me that most round log buildings were built very close to the 1900s, maybe 1890 and after. Before that time, most everything was hewn. Okay, so hand planing. Hand planing was used for floorboards, for floor joists that you see here, and what else? Any kind of finished carpentry that you wanted to see a nice smooth surface. So about 1870, planing mills came into this area later than surrounding areas because Floyd County was historically remote. And I've seen a lot of hand planed material in Floyd County all the way up into the 1870s, whereas in more populated areas, it's pretty much done by the 1850s. By Civil War period, you don't see a lot of hand planing anymore. And I love to see hand planing because it's a sign of workmanship. And you can see every stroke of the plane a lot of times. So on these floor joists that are carrying the second floor, can you make out the beads along the edge? That continuous bead along the edge? Like, I hope so, right here. So that was done with a beading plane. And if you see a bead on the joist, that probably means that the joist was planed by hand. And at that time, they used a beading plane to create that bead along the edges. And that practice in most areas seems to stop right about 1840. I mean, give or take, always give or take with any of the dates I tell you, but right about 1840, that seems to have just gone out of style. And it was an extra amount of work for a lot of times no reason, because no sooner did they build the building that they covered these joists with plaster or even boards. And a lot of log houses have board ceilings or even plaster ceilings. And then they never saw the bead again. So why do it? It was because it was practice. It was the way they did their practice. It's just what they were used to doing, and that's how they were taught to do it. Okay. So these are hand-planed ceiling boards, hand-planed and beaded ceiling boards. See the bead along the edge? Those are very, very common in all kinds of old houses, not just log houses, not just houses. But you can see each stroke of what they called a scrub plane. The scrub plane was for removing large amounts of wood at a time with each stroke of the plane. Can you all see that? Every one of those is a stroke of the plane, every one of those. So to me, I love to see that, because I can see that whoever did that work, I can see almost every move they made. You know what I mean? It's a very clear representation of handcrafting. And why they went to the trouble to make a bead on each board. You see them on ceilings, you see them on walls too. Sometimes the whole interior is covered with these hand-planed and beaded boards. So that's fantastic. I want to tell you a little bit about nails, because nails are one of our best dating clues that we use in all types of buildings. And I found this online, and it's pretty good. From a professor from the University of Vermont did this. But Vermont, you know, they had a lot of early industry, unlike Virginia. Rural Virginia did not have a lot of early industry, so the dates are definitely different. And so I added my own dates on the right. So in this area, if all the nails in a building are hand-wrought nails, I'm gonna tend to think that it was built before 1815 or so. One reason I like that date is because when Thomas Jefferson was building Poplar Forest, he sent one of his workers into Lynchburg to look for some wrought nails, and he returned empty-handed because he couldn't find any wrought nails. Cut nails had overtaken the marketplace. They were cheaper and more plentiful. Hand-wrought nails were completely made by hand by a blacksmith, and it was a lot of work making those nails. In other places, like in Vermont, the wrought nail's kind of old-fashioned by 1800, but here you'll see them in structural use up until about 1815, and then after that you'll still see them used sticking in joists to hang things on. You'll see them in non-structural use just for, you know, mostly for hanging. Or indoors, when they made batten doors, wrought nails were very good for clenching. You could stick them through and then bend them over. Cut nails you couldn't really do that with, at least not until later. So the earliest cut nails that I really see around here tend to date to the late 18 teens. But if you have a really well-formed cut nail, like the third one down, that's gonna be about 1830 or later. And then wire nails came on the market nationally in about 1888, but in my experience, you just don't see them in buildings here, not just in Floyd, but in all of Southwest Virginia, until about 1895. If I see a house or a building that's all wire nails, I wouldn't believe that it was built before maybe 1893 at the earliest. 1895 is a really good cutoff for that here. So if you look all through your building, every nail has a round head and a round shank. It's a wire nail, and you're looking at probably 1895 or thereafter. So that's a dating scheme that I use for nails, and it really is important. There's a lot of literature on nails. I'm not going to focus too much on this one, but it's a really well-known book among architectural people. And it's a whole book about nails and dating nails. And so people have taken it, made a real science out of it. This is something I used when I did my master's thesis on a log building at Virginia Tech, and I was able to help corroborate the date that I was proposing for this building by taking we dug up, we did archaeology around the building, and we collected a whole lot of window glass, flat glass. And window glass during the 19th century can be dated to some degree. You got to have some calipers and measure the thickness of the glass really closely, and then it will help you with your dating scenario. So it's not something that I can say I've done since my thesis, but I just wanted to tell you about that because I want people to trust my dating, and not everyone does. I'll tell you that right now.
They want it all to be 1860 or 1799.
Right.
Right before one of those.
Yes. If I don't know the date, I'm just going to tell you straight. If I have no clue, I'm going to tell you straight. But so many times that I come up with a date I'm pretty confident about, and the property owner just doesn't believe me. And that's fine. You don't have to. But I just want you all to understand that I've spent a lot of time with this stuff, and I use the knowledge at hand to try to date buildings as closely as I can. So lastly is dendrochronology, which is using tree ring dates to date when a tree was cut down. So the logs in a building, what year were they cut down? That can only be told by tree ring dating, which is a scientific endeavor. I've been involved with a handful of dendrochronology projects, including my master's thesis. That building on the top right was a well-known dendrochronologist at Virginia Tech named Herman Heikkinen. And he actually employed me for a while, and I went out on the road with him in Eastern Virginia, cutting up colonial buildings so that they could be dated. And when I say cutting up, I mean literally. We cut pieces off, and it made me cringe. But that was his practice. He's gone now. He'd probably kill me for saying it. But when nobody was looking, he would cut a slice off the end of a beam because it's a lot easier to date a slab than a core. So in the top left, you see me taking a core sample out of the top log of a building. And that was a log house in Maryland that I got hired to work with a dendrochronology project. But without getting into too much detail, with dendrochronology, you can date not only the year a log was felled, but the season. So it can be very, very precise. But let's say that I do and I have to draw samples from 12 to 15 logs out of a single pen in order to really have a statistically accurate sample. So it's a lot of cutting and drilling. It's a lot of hard work, and it leaves some damage that's unsightly. So I don't usually recommend this study to too many people, but I guess enough said about that. You can date a log building all the way down to the season the logs are felled. But if I got 15 samples and they're all over the map, what does that tell me? Not much, really. It gives me maybe the earliest date and the latest date it could have been built. But if they're all over the map, it's not very helpful. All right, I got through that pretty quick, yes.
Are there no written records to be used for dating?
Well, that's a really good question. There are some written records, but the best records for dating buildings, are land tax books. And in Virginia, around 1820, most counties started separating the value of buildings from the value of the land. Before that, it was all lumped together in one value, so you really couldn't tell, was there a building on the land or wasn't there? But around 1820, 1821, they would, for a county like Floyd, they would usually send out two assessors, one to do one half of the county, one to do the other half of the county. And And if the property was worth, say, $1,000, and then you see over in the improvement column, $150, that means there's building on the property. And a log house would probably be valued at, let's say in 1840, 1850. A log house would be valued at no more than probably $300. So it could be $100 for a little bitty shack, could be maybe $150, $200 for a nicer log house. And I would say a nice 2-story log house might be $300, $350. A big brick house might be $1,500. But, you know, log houses are tougher because the tax assessors didn't really see a lot of value there. And they might not even mention it. They might not mention it for a while, maybe later on in time. And you could be looking at the value of barns. There could be barns on the property. So it's any kind of improvement, and that usually wasn't spelled out. Sometimes the assessor would say, $400 added for a new house. And then that's beautiful if they did that, but a lot of times they didn't. So other than that, there's really not a lot of records that can help you with dating buildings, unless it's in somebody's will, or there might be some kind of note on a deed that talks about it, but it's hit or miss. It's very much hit or miss. So records oftentimes aren't too much help. So, and please interrupt me if you have any other questions. So this house is, most of you probably know this place, right? The Flieger house. Some of us know it probably better than we ever even intended, because it was just sitting there for so long, and many people were concerned about it. And over the years, I've been invited to meetings there probably 5 or 6 times. I think the last time I was there was 2018. Dan nominated to the register back in 2004, 25, something like that. So it's on the National Register. What does that do to save a building? Not a whole lot, usually. But it's a super interesting house, and it's one of the oldest houses in the county, one of the oldest houses of any kind in the county. And it was a great example of a log house, because the front right part of the house was all log. The right part that has the chimney on it. And then, let's see, let me just tell you a little bit about it. The initials, I haven't shown you the initials yet. On the top left side, if you've never been there and seen this is a date stone in the chimney. And it says GP 1816. And the initials were for George Flieger, the original owner. George was a member of a group of German-American settlers who arrived in the county after 1790. His grandson, William S. Flieger, appears to have made the 2-story frame addition, which is on the left in that top shot. And that's made of frame. He made that addition probably shortly after 1900. The property remained in family ownership until the 1990s, and then it just kind of got abandoned. But it's a great example of a log house because it has that 2-story log pen in the front, and then it had a log kitchen on the back. And then it had another frame extension even further back. But so that log kitchen was originally, appears to have been freestanding, and then there was a breezeway between the front part of the house and that kitchen. And then over time, it all just got built in together. So it had a really nice fireplace. If you go over to Franklin County, almost all the fireplaces in small or log houses have a big stone lintel going over the top that carried the load of everything above it. So the fireplace, the top of the fireplace was just one big, huge rock. But I've noticed in putting this talk together, doesn't seem to be the case in Floyd County. The fireplaces were really nicely made, arches, load-bearing arches with stones that fit all together. And you can kind of see the shape of the fireplace here in the Flieger house. The chimney is just, except for that top part that got parged with cement at some point to try to hold it all together, it's a beautiful chimney. And you can see the logs here, and the stone foundation that it sat on. So I'm just going to go through and show you some other examples that I've documented over the years. And this is one of the most recent ones that I've seen. Some folks affiliated with the Historical Society arranged for me to go out and see this. It's a neat little house. It's not as early as the owners thought, and I don't know if they were angry with my assessment or not. But look at the logs on the back, how small they are. And I always tell people, you can't date a building by the size of the logs. I mean, that's definitely true. But at the same time, they did tend to get smaller over time. I've seen pictures of 18th century log houses, and some of those logs are like this. And then as you get closer to the 20th century, you're getting smaller and smaller logs. But that doesn't mean that you can't see a log house built in 1890 that has huge poplar logs. There's plenty of exceptions to that rule. So it's not a reliable way to date buildings. But these are some very, very small logs. And I mean, that really does say to me, this is a little later than most people would have suspected. And you can see it had an addition on the back. That's why those logs are exposed there. It had a gable roof addition on the back. The bricks are handmade bricks, and that's a clue because around 1890 to 1900, handmade bricks are done. Factory brick makers are opening in places like Radford and Chilhowie and Lexington, Buena Vista, Glasgow, all over. There's lots of factory brick places popping up in the 1880s. And more remote places like Floyd are going to have handmade bricks until about 1900 or so. You can definitely tell a handmade brick. They're much less perfect. They're not all uniform. They're more porous. They're not uniform in color, and they're not uniform in size and shape. And I have a whole brick talk that I could give you at some other point in time. Love to talk about bricks. But that's a clue also to help you date buildings. And this is just to give you a glimpse of the inside of the house. And notice the fireplace, what I was just talking about. That's called a segmental arch because it's a segment of a circle. And so that takes more craftsmanship, less strength, less brute strength than bringing a massive stone lintel in there. But it definitely took a higher level of craftsmanship. And then this house inside is all the walls and ceilings are covered with with boards. So that's just a glimpse of the inside. This house I looked at a few years ago when a friend of mine, a craftsman named Al Anderson, was hired to work on it. And the house that you see there is not log, but it is a house built around 1870. And then in the back is a log. This rear L or rear wing is made of logs. So why would that be? Why would you build a frame house and then have an L that's built of logs? Most people would think, well, that log house is probably the original house, and then the frame house was added to it. In this case, not the case. Within the log pen, we noticed that the logs are all numbered. And so why were the logs all numbered? Because the log building was taken apart and brought over here and rebuilt as the L. And you can see the logs in that upper shot where the chimney used to be. The chimney just collapsed. And so it was done. But inside the house is a 1.5 story log pen with hewn logs. And this top log, the top log is called the plate or top plate. They rotated it for some reason and left it like that. And when they did, it exposed the peg. And that's pretty cool to see that because log buildings really didn't need pegs. Most of them, their logs are not pegged. They're just fixed by the notching. The notching is what keeps the logs in place. But that's kind of an extra piece of craftsmanship there. And then the other thing is that most log buildings are 1.5 stories, and I'll show you some better illustrations to help you understand that, but they're 1.5 stories, not 2 stories. And so a lot of times what people did was they came and added framing on top of that half story, that top half story, to make it into a 2-story building. So it's logs up to 1.5 stories, and then it's framed to the roof. And that's what you see here, and that's why that rear L is 2 stories. But it was just a tremendously cool house to get in there and try to figure everything out. And if it weren't for those numbers on the logs, we'd probably still be scratching our heads about what exactly happened there. So this is the, I think this barn was taken down. Maybe somebody here knows. Is it still there? Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, that's good to hear. So it's a double crib log barn. There used to be a lot of these all over my region, double crib log barns. But what happened was farmers, they came out with the round bale. And once they came out with a round bale, these barns were obsolete. You can't fit a round bale in there if you wanted to. And the round bales, they're wrapped and they're just kept outside. So if you're a farmer and you can no longer keep hay in the barn and you have no use for it, what are you going to do? You're just going to let it go, which I can't blame you. If you're a farmer, you don't have a use for a building, why would I expect you to continue to invest in it and continue to maintenance it unless you're a history buff or a log building buff? I mean, farmers tend to be, bottom line, they don't make a lot of profit. They just don't have the money most of the time to maintain buildings that they're not using. And that's what happened to the log barn. And so log barns have been taken down all over. I always read, oh, this house, in fact, I went to one in Roanoke County the other day. Dan surveyed it in 1989. That was one of the high points of this property, was this double crib log barn in Roanoke County. Now that's gone. So that was a real letdown when I got out there. But this one had a little graffiti in it that says AD 1854. We don't always take graffiti to be the date of construction, but in this case, we kind of did. The way they did the A with that little, that's kind of an old-fashioned thing. And, in the construction of it, it was so immaculate that we didn't have any problem believing that that was a pretty appropriate date. And the interesting thing about this to me is, in all the time that we've been evaluating things for the National Register, we didn't have a single barn that was individually eligible for the register in the state at the time this came to our attention. And because it was such a neat barn, I think it was the first barn in all of Virginia to be determined eligible for the National Register without a house or any other thing included with it. And since then, we've had some others actually listed on a register, but not many. So it has to be pretty special. And I think this picture on the left is just a gorgeous shot that shows these two beautifully plumbed log cribs, or I would just call them pens. And then look how neatly cut the V-notches are, how well they fit, everything fits together. I mean, these people really knew what they were doing. They did it all the time, and they knew what they were doing.
The Asa Bishop barn was the builder, Asa Bishop.
Oh, okay.
So AG was the last owner before the current owner, but Asa Bishop built it.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna write that down. And keep talking. Well, it hasn't been nominated. It was just evaluated, and then the owner just was like, well, I can't get tax credits, or he just didn't see any point to go forward.
The current owners are interested in finding out about it.
Okay.
In fact, one visited Old Church Gallery recently and asked how could they find out some information. And So I would love to put you in touch with
Sure.
them. Their question, I think they're limited in their funds, and so they're thinking, how can I save it, though I can't afford to save it?
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem, and there's really not much available that could help them. I mean, there are some tax credits, but they have to spend the money themselves and then get a credit. So, Asa Bishop, got it. All right. So, this is just to illustrate that any kind of building could be built of logs. And every kind of building was built of logs in Southwest Virginia. There was courthouses, there was churches, schools, everything was built of logs originally. I mean, there were some other types. There was wood frame and things like that, but the point is that there's so many different kinds of buildings that could be built of logs. And in Floyd, I haven't found a lot of anything but houses. And I don't have the ability to just take off one day and pour all over the county and try to find buildings, and try to find people to allow me to go on their land. It's a very time-consuming thing. And virtually everything that I'm showing you are places where I got invited out to, and that's how I got to see it. But I haven't seen a lot of outbuildings in Floyd that are made of logs. And one of the great things about this one is it has dovetail notches. So it's a really nicely constructed small outbuilding for its time. I'm not even sure what it was, if it was a corn crib or granary or maybe a meat house. I think that upstairs opening was probably put in later, but it's a great little building. This one, you probably know this one because it's out in that AG area. Right, exactly. So Catherine Inglesby took me out here in 2011, and I got permission to go inside this little house, and lo and behold, it's just a beautifully built log structure inside with dovetail notches. The logs in there just beautifully preserved, and a rare dovetail notched log house in this region. I can't really tell you much more about it. I spent probably 20 minutes there, but it's a good, noteworthy example. I would love to see that building preserved. So this one I just came across one day at the corner of Woods Gap Road and Roberson Mill Road. I don't know if it's still there. Does anyone know? Still there? Okay. Well, does anyone here own it? Okay, well, I went inside. It was such an interesting house, and I think I had a little extra time, and apparently it wasn't posted because I am careful about that. And it's just a great little house, wonderful stone chimneys. And the only place I saw logs was in this one place where the wall is separating. And up until that point, I wasn't sure, I don't think, that it was a log house. But here's a good example of the walls and ceilings all clad with boards. Sometimes those are tongue and groove boards, sometimes not. And here's an example of that massive lintel I was talking about. So it's just one big stone. In this case, maybe soapstone. Lots of soapstone fireplaces in this area. But that's just to give you a glimpse of what it looked like inside. This house, you guys know this one? Is it still there? Anyone? Wow. Is it really? Oh, thank goodness. This is such a neat house. That's another one, I just stopped and I was like, well, I don't see anybody. There's no postings. I'm going to check it out. And what I found here is that if my pointer was working, what I found here is that there's a void in the foundation between here and here. So this log pen stops right there. This log pen begins right there. This was an open breezeway. So this is a dog trot. This is the only dog trot house that I think I've seen in Floyd County. And most of the time, dog trots are like the same height, but not always. I've found some examples where they're not. And so it's a double pen house, and really nicely well built. I have a few other pictures of it. Great chimney, part stone and handmade brick. V-notches at the corners, beautifully hewn logs. But I dated this house to about 1860. It's not as early as you might think. About 1860. It's definitely not as early. It's not as early as I would have thought. And then the corner stairs. The corner stair is the most common staircase in any kind of small building, small house. Doesn't have to be log, any kind of small house. They built these corner stairs just to save space within this small area. The thing about it is, how did you get any furniture upstairs? If you had a nice bed or anything, you had to take it apart to get it up there. And on the left, you see the V-notches, really well, nicely cut. And the fact that the whole building just stands on these stone piers. And that's the way a lot of log houses were built. They're built on stone piers. And then maybe somebody came along later and infilled those gaps between the piers. And a lot of times you can see that. You can see that it doesn't all quite match and that the infill came in later. But, log buildings could be put up easily and quickly, and that was the attraction. And if you didn't have to build a whole foundation, then, in many cases, why bother? Maybe it did make you colder during the winter, but you really didn't need a whole foundation because that bottom log is so heavy. You want to use your biggest, heaviest logs at the bottom because they're under compression and they're holding all the weight. So you really could use your biggest logs at the bottom and your smallest logs at the top, and that would probably work out great. So this house, I'd be kind of surprised if anyone does know this in the room and you wouldn't recognize it now because it's been completely rehabbed. But it was off the road quite a bit, and my buddy Al Anderson was working on it, and he got it all stabilized and straightened. And it's a late example of a log house, but it has some very interesting features. For one thing, let's start on the left. See that notch? Does anybody have a guess what that notch would be for? That notch on the bottom of the top log? That is to insert a board to stand on while you're building the logs above. So all they had to do, stick the board in there, stand on the board, and do this really intricate work that they were doing on this house. And it's intricate to the point of not making sense to anybody. So what they did here, and it's hard to see, hard to tell, but this is a log and that's a log, but this is chinking. And it's cut perfectly to the contours of the log. And it comes out flush to the edges of the log, so no need for daubing, no need for anything, and it was almost built like airtight. And who had the skill and the patience and the time to cut the chinking to perfect contours to fit so neatly between the logs? I've never seen that anywhere before. And furthermore, every one of those pieces of chinking are held in place with these pegs. I've never seen this. This is totally unusual to me. So let me come over and point out these pegs. So that's a peg, that's one, and that's one. And there was newspaper on the walls dating to 1893. That doesn't mean it was when the houses built. But then here is a place where the peg was missing, which was enlightening to me because I just couldn't, although if you look at that one, it's pretty clear there's a hole in that bottom log. But on the other ones, I just couldn't tell. Did that peg go into a hole, or was it just wedged in there real tight to keep that chinking from moving? Well, no, there's a hole. You can see it right there, and I know this is a fuzzy shot. But that seems like just an unbelievable amount of work to me. When surely they knew there were easier and faster ways of doing this. That's just those are the kind of things that kind of make my day when I get in there and I see something that's that unusual and almost hard to comprehend. So I think that's about all I can really tell you about this building. I definitely think it's a later example, and I think that 1893 is not out of the question. And I've seen a lot of buildings, even too recently, traditional log houses built just like they would have been built in 1840, 1850, that were built after the turn of the century in the 1900s. Stone chimneys, hand-hewn, V-notching, the whole bit. And a lot of people don't recognize that. In fact, an architectural historian that's on our state review board, he has a PhD in architectural history. He's works at Colonial Williamsburg. He's, a big name, I guess, in a sense. He just wouldn't believe me that I see log houses built after 1900 on a regular basis, but I do. I mean, I guess maybe I've seen a dozen in my career, but that's more than anybody thought. Any of the log literature that you look at says that log construction petered out like in the late 1800s, and it's just truly not the case. And mostly it's nails that bear that out. If I look through an entire house and there's not a cut nail in there anywhere, I'm sorry. It's a 20th century house. It just is. Okay, I'm getting near the end here because the thing about log houses is the ones that are in good shape are all covered up. There's nothing much to see. I can't tell you about how they're built. I can't say much. And there's lots of log houses around. They're covered up inside and out. I don't know what kind of notch it is. I can't even be sure that it's built of log. So I'm actively looking for log buildings kind of in this kind of condition. Would I love to see it preserved? Absolutely. But buildings in poor condition are actually endlessly more interesting than buildings in good condition, because I can see how they're constructed and I can see all kinds of construction features and details. I don't even remember looking at this place in 2013, but I was glad. I keep all of my photos on my laptop, and I came across this when I was putting this talk together. And see in my notes here. Oh, by the way, this house is made of chestnut. All those logs are chestnut. Everybody tells me that log houses are made of chestnut, and like 90% of the time they aren't. Chestnut logs, for some reason, are just not common. There's chestnut in the chinking, chestnut in the shingles. They're not common in the logs. And I just saw that in my notes, so I wanted to say that. But what got me about this house is it only had one window. Ignore that hole in the top. That wasn't there. Somebody came along with a chainsaw and just cut that out. Could have been 10 years ago or whatever. It has one small window in the entire house. What does that tell you? It tells you that these people were exceedingly poor. It's not a slave house because it's too late to be a slave house, but it could be and probably was a tenant farmer. Some of these tenant farmers had virtually nothing in terms of cash, and they lived a very poor existence. And not only is there only one window, but that's a little tiny window, it's pretty small. But it's a pretty late example of a log house. I just put late 19th century on it. Oh yeah, I got another picture. Okay. Pretty small logs, I would have to say. Crude notching, probably hard for you to see. The notches are very crude. And then inside, this is where I wanted to talk a little bit about how many stories a log house can be. But first of all, here's your little corner stair on the left, and it looks pretty crude, but the fireplace, again, is one of those beautifully crafted with a true arch, with stones that fit together to carry that weight. And then on the top, this is still, I would still call it a half story on the top, but it's an unusually tall half story. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 logs there. Most of the time it's 3 or 4 logs. But so that's a little bit unusual. And then also on the top, that top plate, that log on the top, you can see how it's kind of turned on its side. And they did that in a lot of log houses so that it would overhang on the outside, because the log was taller than it was wide. So when you rotate it, it's overhanging on the outside. And that was so that it could carry the eaves a little further out and give you a good place to notch the rafters in. And that's really common on most of the log houses I've seen.
So, Mike,
Yeah, yes.
That other house, that garret, that upstairs had no windows at all. It would have been pitch dark.
Yeah, pitch dark and no fireplace. And so no heat up there.
Yeah.
So, but I'm thinking that fireplace is awfully close to the stair. Maybe, a little heat went up the stair, but that's just, that's.
The functionality of it, why even have it if you
Yeah.
use it?
I mean, I guess they could use it, but they just had to really huddle together. I mean, I saw a house in Amherst County the other day that was built by the Monacan Indians. It was a traditional log house, and it was built after 1900. And Dan, you have to keep coming up because I see your work everywhere. I looked at your Amherst County survey report from maybe 15 years ago, and you had 2 eyewitness accounts of people seeing the Monacan cabins. And so there was a lot of Monacans living in this area called Bear Mountain. And I know I'm getting off the subject, but there's a point. And that is that the eyewitnesses said there was 3 to 4 families, 2 to 3 families living in these houses. They're 16 by 16 or 18 by 18 feet. And there's 2 eyewitness accounts from 1908 and 1920 something that says there's 2 or 3 families living in each one of these houses. And that, that one, I don't think that one had an upstairs fireplace either. So, I mean, they just know how to endure cold, and I guess they just huddled together. I don't know how they survived the winters. So this is out at the top, I guess near Indian Valley, where it's pretty close to 221. I can't even remember why I was out there, but a lot of people just call me and say, just come out and either tell me what you see here, can you interpret this, or what should I do to preserve it, or they have some interest in the National Register, which I administer the National Register in all of Western Virginia, or they're just interested in some kind of financial help, which is very hard to come by. But so if somebody calls me, I definitely will go out and see it. And seldom am I really disappointed. There's always something interesting to see. And it's an interesting little house.
Is that a TV antenna?
Yeah. I think it is, yeah. And a lot of these have been occupied until very recently. It's hard to imagine sometimes. Sometimes people leave and they just leave everything just like it was, clothes in the closet, clothes laid out on the bed, and they just left. And, 10, 15 years ago, maybe, they both got sick and never came back. I don't know, but I've seen that a fair amount. So just to contrast here, the upper half story with the one we just saw. This is a more typical half story. Some people call that a knee wall, but it's really about waist height. And so if it's a half a story, you can't walk all the way over. Like this is almost a half a story because I can't stand right here without hitting my head. If it's 2 full stories, it's going to be up here, if that makes sense. So this is a half a story, and this is the way that the gable end studs are almost always mortised into that plate. If you can see that, I mean, you can't really see that they're mortised. They could be nailed for all you know. But they make a hole, and then they insert that. So it's a mortise, it's a tenon in a mortise. And that's the way that they're done traditionally. Yes, sure.
Well, we saw a log cabin, and like, what is all that black on the walls? It's like, I thought like the upstairs was maybe had a fire, but it's like, the logs are like black.
It might just be an accumulation of smoke, like years and years of smoke,
You
or...
had a picture earlier when you were showing the joints or something, and the wood was like all dark black.
Yeah.
Someone told us they might have put like motor oil. We couldn't
Well,
believe that, but
I doubt that's what it is, but I have seen log buildings coated with motor oil.
it's just like some
Yes.
of the walls are like, yeah.
That's probably not what it is. I mean, it might just be an accumulation of smoke or even water staining. I don't really know for sure, but I doubt it. I doubt that it's motor oil. But I've seen 1 or 2 instances of the whole exterior of log buildings coated in motor oil, and you know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I really don't know. All right, so well, it's not going. Oh, get out of that stupid thing. All right, I just have a couple more houses for you. This house, Jim Short. Somebody here probably knows Jim Short. I haven't talked to him since I was probably in 2011, but he called me, asked me to come out, take a look at the house. It's a fascinating house, and I really enjoyed the opportunity. And it is a log house, so this was a 1.5 story log house. I have a little bit of history. It became it started as a 1.5 story log pen. Probably during the last quarter of the 19th century, the log pen was raised to 2 full stories and substantially appended to the west. So the part on the left is probably frame, and then the door, the front door, and the window and everything on the right is all log. So it was raised 2 full stories during the last quarter of the 19th century, appended to the west using framing lumber to create a 2-story center passage house. In 1907, Amos Short appended the house once again, building a 2-story rear L over the shingled existing roof. So that's what you see on the right. They didn't even take that roof up, they just put a roof over it. And so that's really a very good example of the type of roofing that log buildings probably had. And they're not carved shingles like the ones I showed you earlier. They're just crude shakes. But, a lot of log houses probably just had shakes. And some of the nicer houses, brick houses and frame houses, had carved shingles that would have looked more attractive and refined. There's not a lot of literature on a lot of this stuff. Boy, if it wasn't for Dan, we wouldn't have much of anything, I'll tell you right now. So another example here that you could see on of them just building on top of the plate of the log building and building an additional half story with framing. And so I've just seen a lot of examples of that, and thought it was worth pointing out. All right, I have one more property to show you. And this is one that Myra Adams took me to. This was in your family, right? And she has more information that she's going to give me. But she took me out there a couple years ago, and it's just awesome. I mean, it's a full 2-story log pen in the front. The chimney is spectacular. The whole big building is set on piers, which is just kind of blows my mind. That they thought that those logs in compression could bear all that weight without more support. And that's because all the weight is on the corners. There's no weight on the middle of the logs really at all. All the compression is at the corners where the notches are. So they could get away with it. And this is the largest fireplace. And all around the fireplace area of the chimney, the stones are soapstone. I think just about every one of those stones in that picture is soapstone. This one is very easy to see that it was. And the advantage of soapstone is it retains heat much better than other rocks do. You all probably know that. Because there's so much soapstone in this county, whole buildings made out of it, right? But that chimney is amazing to me. Have no idea how long it would have taken to build that. And then it has this rear L with its own chimney. And then, so this shed was probably added around 1900 or something. It would be kind of nice to have a look at the building without that shed being added on, but it's all of everything behind that shed is all made of log. And I do have some interiors that show that. I think this shows it really well. So just like that barn we looked at earlier. And so on the right is that 2-story front section, and on the left is the rear L. Both made of very large. See, here's a good example of some adze marks on these logs. But they're beautifully hewn logs, and they're massive, quite massive. What else?
Were those
Let's see.
interior logs ever chinked?
Yes, I'm sure they were. I'm sure they were. But it's kind of hard to tell. You know, it's in really bad condition, and it's kind of hard to tell some things like that. Like somebody may have just come in and raked it all out, or maybe they had boards up and there was no reason to chink, possibly. But one reason to chink is to keep the vermin and things out. Like rats would get in the walls. So you really didn't want a lot of voids in the walls. You had mice, you had rats, and all kinds of things scurrying around in there. So what else I want to tell you about this? Let's see. So I've dated this house to, I think circa 1840 is a good date, but it could be in the 30s, say give or take 10 years, and I feel pretty confident about that. It could be 1850. It could be 1830, but I think 1840 is a pretty good guess. I think I've told you most of the things at my notes. So here's the fireplace on the first floor. It's damaged pretty bad. It was really not too safe to even be in this front room. But the floor joists, look at the floor joists. Those are all massive logs as well. That's pretty common, that most log houses have these massive floor joists. They're close together. That floor could hold an unbelievably heavy load. It's way over-engineered by modern standards, but that just illustrates in the day, wood was not the commodity that it is now. You could go out and fell your own trees. A little bit later, when sawmills are coming in, wood becomes much more of a commodity, and people's land is deforested. If we could see all these farms that are wooded now, back in 1850, a lot of them were void of trees. They had split rail fences, they had log houses, they needed the wood, they needed fuel, and there's very few trees left. So that was one of the reasons that log buildings fell out of favor, is because it's not economical use of wood. It uses so much more wood than you have to build a building. But we didn't have the sawmills here, right? So in the 1850s, people started getting portable, steam-powered radial saws, and they could haul them around on wagons and take them up into the hollow and cut a whole bunch of wood. And so cut lumber became much more plentiful and cheaper. And that was one of the things that helped log buildings become obsolete. Now on the right side here is a second floor joist in the front section of this Reuben short house. And those are 2 machine cut nails that are bent over. The reason I wanted to show that is because to point out the fact that if you want to look for nails for dating, the best place to look for those in any old building is the second floor flooring, because it's the least likely thing in a house to really get replaced. Second floors didn't get a lot of use. People went up there and slept, and there's just no reason in most houses or most buildings to ever replace the second floor. So if you really want to get an idea of what the original nails were, that's the best place to look. And that's what I've done here. And these are fully mature cut nails, the same as I found all throughout this house. I spent maybe half hour, 45 minutes in the house. I never saw a rot nail or anything close to that, or even what they call an immature cut nail, before the nail cutting process became perfected around 1830. So I think that gives me pretty solid ground to stand on with my estimated construction date. So that's about it. I just wanted to tell you about this project I'm working on. And it's called a multiple property document, which is kind of hard, even for somebody that's been in the field, to wrap your head around. It's not a National Register nomination, but it's similar. And so I've decided to do this one called Traditional Log Buildings of Virginia, and that's why this talk ties in really well to that project that I'm currently working on as time permits. And so what it does is, it's a cover document for a certain type of resource or a certain type of building, so that if you wanted to have your log house registered on a national register, we would have to evaluate it. Not every house or every log house is going to be eligible for the register. The register sets a high bar for significance and for integrity. So if a building's been changed a lot and then it's lost integrity, then it may not be eligible for the National Register. We have to take all that in consideration. Anyway, what I'm trying to do is write a context for traditional log buildings throughout the state of Virginia. Doing Eastern Virginia is a real challenge for me because I don't have any data really to work with. My whole career I've been in this region. I have hundreds and hundreds of log buildings that I've recorded over this time period, but I want it to apply to the whole state, because as it turns out, there's no books about log buildings, I don't think, in Virginia. Have you ever seen one, Dan?
There's one for Rockbridge County, but
Okay.
statewide.
There's a real dearth of literature on log buildings in Virginia. There's no one source that you can go to and learn a lot about it. And so this might be the swan song of my career, but I'm going to get this thing done. And so that if you have a house, a log house that's eligible, or a log building of any type, a barn, that you want to be eligible for the National Register, or you want to make a case for it, you'll be able to come to my document and learn about log buildings of that type with those features, and thereby build a context of your own much more easily than if you had to start from scratch. If you, like I said, if you had to start from scratch, there's nothing to rely on. You could look at log buildings of Rockbridge County. I know that book, Dan. It's not very authoritative at all. It really is not. It has a lot of good pictures. But, there's one from East Tennessee. It's a good book, but it was done in 1980. And he looked at a few counties of East Tennessee. And then there's one from Ohio, and that's about it. And when I was doing my master's thesis, I relied pretty heavily on those 2 books because there just wasn't anything in Virginia on the subject. And why is that? It doesn't make any sense. We probably have more log houses, more log buildings than all of them. I mean, density-wise, I don't know. We don't have figures. We don't have facts. We don't have any of those things. How have we overlooked that over all these years? I don't know. But I intend to remedy that situation. And that's one of the reasons I'm here today, because I want you all to help me find some more buildings. Because the more I can find, and the more with these different kinds of individualized features, like the peg chinking or any of those things, I think could be really helpful towards this document that hopefully will outlive all of us and be a good, comprehensive, more or less comprehensive record of log construction in Virginia. So that's my pitch. Please call me if you think that you have anything of interest. I'll be delighted to come out and see it. Thank you so much for being here and listening today, and your comments if you have any others. Yes.
You mentioned chestnut logs.
Yes.
What were besides chestnut?
Oh, good question. White oak. White oak is the normally preferred. It seems to have been. It's the strongest, and it's for its weight. Chestnut is actually heavier, and it's a little bit less strong. So white oak seems to have been preferred. Plus, chestnut had other more uses historically. It split easier and things like that. But white oak seems to be probably the most common, followed by pine. Pine was very common. Old pine was very decay resistant. It was really good wood to work with. And then poplar, yellow poplar, is also quite common. And for dendrochronology that I mentioned earlier, only oak is datable. Pine is not really datable because they don't have reliable data for pine, and poplar is not datable with dendrochronology at this point in time because they just don't have enough data on how it grew and that sort of thing. But oak is very easy to date with dendrochronology. Yes, ma'am.
How do you know when that oak tree first started to grow? That's what I'm trying to...
Yeah, so with dendrochronology, what they do is they measure the distance between every growth ring, and then they line it up with records. So what that guy, Dr. Heikkinen, that I showed you his back, he patented a method called the key year method. And when he patented it, dendrochronologists all across the country got really angry because they all knew about it and they weren't using it to date buildings like he was. So he got sued over it, I believe. But so anyway, what they do is if there's a key year, like 1840 was really super dry, so dry that the trees didn't put on another ring that year. And then the following 3 years, it was super wet. And sometimes they even put on more than one ring in a year because the weather cycle actually fooled the trees into thinking it was starting a new cycle. And so so that's what they're looking for. They're looking for these anomalies in the record. And by the way, dendrochronology, it wasn't developed for dating buildings. It was developed by forest ecologists so that they can understand growth patterns, and that's what it's really used for. And then dating buildings is just kind of an offshoot of that. But they use that key year method to line everything up. So if my tree was cut in 1756, if it was born in 1756 and cut in 1850, then we'll see those growth rings line up in 1840 with that key year, and everything will fall into place. That's how they do it. And so, in order to do dendrochronology, you have to have the very outer layer of wood intact. If that's been sawn off, you can't date it. You have to have the very outer layer because that's the year that the log was cut. Otherwise, you'll know when the tree was born, but you won't know when it was cut down. So that's how it's done. It's it's really fascinating science. And you can hire somebody to do it. The nearest person I know of that does it for a living is based out of Baltimore. And he's done a lot of work in Virginia. And the last time I saw an estimate, it was only like $3,000 or $4,000 to come all the way out here. And that's actually a bargain because there's a lot of work involved. So, any other questions? Well, thank you very much. I know I took a long time. So, thank you. Thank you very much, Gina. Appreciate it.